The Vallani Empire had ruled the outer edges of the galaxy for over 300 years. Their massive purple warships with glowing energy weapons had conquered dozens of worlds, and they believed no one could challenge their power. The Vallani were tall, grey-skinned aliens with forearms and cold, calculating minds. They saw other species as nothing more than resources to be harvested or slaves to be controlled. On a quiet Tuesday morning, their exploration fleet stumbled upon something unexpected. Hidden in a distant star system, they found a small blue and green planet called New Haven. The world was covered in golden wheat fields, green forests, and peaceful farming communities. 60,000 humans lived there, growing food and raising families in simple towns scattered across the continents. The Vallani commander, a scarred veteran named Zexathara, studied the planet through his ship's scanners. He saw primitive settlements, basic technology, and what appeared to be a defenseless agricultural world. The humans had no military bases, no weapon factories, just farms and schools and small cities. To the Vallani, this looked like an easy conquest. Colonial Administrator Kim Ji-ho was tending to his garden when the alien ships appeared in the sky. A middle-aged man with kind eyes and calloused hands from years of farming, Kim had been chosen by the colonists to represent them in matters of governance. He was not a soldier or a politician, just a farmer who cared deeply about his community. The Vallani ships descended like dark clouds, blocking out the sun over New Haven's capital city of Greendale. Massive broadcast towers emerged from the alien vessels, and Zexathara's voice echoed across every speaker on the planet. His words were translated into human language by advanced computers. "Primitive humans of this world," the alien commander announced, "you now belong to the Vallani Empire. You will provide us with 10,000 of your people as slaves each year. You will give us half of all food you produce. You will surrender your weapons and submit to our rule. You have 1 day to comply." Kim Ji-ho stood in the town square, surrounded by frightened families. Children clung to their parents, while elderly farmers shook their heads in disbelief. The colonists had come to New Haven to escape the conflicts of more populated worlds. They wanted peace, not war. But Kim knew that surrendering to the Vallani meant watching his people become slaves. He had heard stories from other worlds about what happened when the grey-skinned aliens took control. Families were separated forever. People were worked to death in alien mines. Children disappeared and were never seen again. That evening, Kim called together the Colony Council. 12 representatives from different towns gathered in the small meeting hall, their faces grim. Outside, the alien ships cast long shadows across the wheat fields. "We cannot give them our people," Kim said quietly. "We cannot let them turn our children into slaves. I know we are not warriors, but some things are worth fighting for." The council voted unanimously. They would refuse the Vallani demands. The next morning, Kim Ji-ho stood alone in the town square, facing the alien ships above. His hands trembled as he activated the colony's communication system. His voice carried to every Vallani vessel in orbit. "We are peaceful people," he said. "We have done nothing to harm you. We will not give you our children. We will not become your slaves. Please leave our world in peace." The response came within minutes. Zexathara's laughter echoed from the speakers, cold and cruel. "Foolish humans. You think your words matter. You think your tiny lives have meaning. Let this be a lesson to any who dare defy the Vallani Empire." The first energy beam struck the eastern farmlands at exactly noon. From space, it looked like a brilliant white light. On the ground, it was hell itself. The beam turned fertile soil into molten glass, vaporized entire farms in seconds, and created a crater 5 miles wide. More beams followed. The northern forests erupted in flames that could be seen from orbit. The southern mining town of Millbrook simply vanished, replaced by a smoking hole in the earth. The aliens were methodical in their destruction, targeting population centers one by one. Park Minji was teaching her 3rd grade class about Earth's history when the bombardment began. The 28-year-old teacher had always loved working with children, and her students adored her gentle nature and patient explanations. When the first explosions shook the school building, she quickly led her 19 students into the underground shelter that every New Haven building was required to have. The shelter was cramped and dark, filled with frightened children and a few other adults who had made it to safety. For 6 hours they listened to the sounds of their world being destroyed above them. The ceiling shook with each explosion. Dust fell like snow. Some of the younger children cried softly while Minji held them close. When the bombardment finally stopped, an eerie silence settled over New Haven. Minji waited another hour before carefully opening the shelter door. What she saw made her heart break. The beautiful farming community of Riverside, where the school was located, no longer existed. Where houses once stood, only twisted metal and ash remained. The river that gave the town its name had been boiled away, leaving a cracked, empty channel. The sky was orange with smoke and falling ash. Of New Haven's 60,000 people, only 4,000 survived that terrible day. They emerged from underground shelters, scattered across the planet to find their world transformed into a nightmare landscape of glass craters and burning ruins. Entire families had been erased from existence. Generations of hard work building their peaceful society had been destroyed in a single afternoon. The Vellani didn't even bother to land and check for survivors. They recorded images of the devastation and broadcast them across local space networks as a warning to other worlds. The message was clear. This is what happens when you defy the Vellani Empire. But the aliens made one critical mistake. They assumed New Haven was just another isolated colony with no connections to anyone who mattered. They thought they had destroyed some primitive farmers who would never be missed. They had no idea that every human world was connected through quantum communication networks. They didn't know that news of New Haven's destruction was already racing across space at the speed of light, reaching every human colony, every Earth government, every defense installation in the galaxy. The Vellani believed they had crushed an insignificant world and sent a powerful message. What they had actually done was awaken something ancient and terrible in the human spirit. Something that had been sleeping peacefully while humanity spread across the stars, building farms and schools and peaceful communities. They had awakened humanity's capacity for righteous fury, and that fury was about to reshape the galaxy forever. The quantum communication pulse reached Earth's orbital stations at 3:47 a.m. Terran Standard Time. The automated systems immediately flagged it as Priority Alpha, the highest possible emergency classification. Within minutes, alarms were sounding in government buildings across the planet as the horrific images from New Haven began flooding communication networks. Defense Minister Lee Dae-ho was having coffee in his office when his aide burst through the door, face pale with shock. The young man's hands trembled as he handed over the datapad containing the initial reports. Dae-ho had served in the military for 30 years and thought he had seen everything war could offer. But the footage from New Haven made his blood run cold. Children's playgrounds turned to glass, schools reduced to smoking craters, entire neighborhoods simply gone as if they had never existed. The alien bombardment had been so thorough, so merciless, that rescue teams couldn't even find bodies to bury. 60,000 peaceful farmers and their families had been murdered for the crime of refusing to become slaves. Within an hour, the Emergency Council was assembled in the secure briefing room beneath the Federation capital. 12 men and women, who governed humanity's interstellar civilization, sat in stunned silence as the reports continued streaming in. The Vellani Empire had broadcast their attack across local space networks, boasting about their easy victory over the primitive humans. President Choi Hyun-woo entered the room with the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. A former colony administrator himself, he understood exactly what Kim Ji-ho had faced on New Haven, the impossible choice between submission and death, the desperate hope that somehow, some way, his people might survive. But Kim Ji-ho and 56,000 others hadn't survived. They had died standing up for the basic principle that no one had the right to enslave another person's children. "Show me everything," President Choi said quietly. The holographic displays filled the room with images of destruction. Satellite footage showed the precise, calculated nature of the Vellani attack. They had targeted population centers first, then infrastructure, then farmland. It wasn't military. Bombardment? It was genocide designed to send a message. Defense Minister Li stood up slowly, his weathered face hard as stone. Mr. President, the Valani don't know what they've done. They think they attacked some isolated farming colony that nobody cares about. They have no idea who we really are. It was true. For over 2 centuries, humanity had deliberately maintained a low profile in galactic politics. When other species looked at human space, they saw a modest collection of agricultural worlds and small trading posts. The humans seemed content to mind their own business, farming their crops and raising their families in peaceful obscurity. What the aliens couldn't see was the true scope of human civilization. Those agricultural worlds were actually sophisticated colonial hubs supporting massive populations. The small trading posts were automated supply stations serving a network of 45,000 human settlements scattered across the galaxy's outer rim. Humanity had spread farther and faster than any species in galactic history, but they had done it quietly, without fanfare or imperial declarations. The other galactic powers saw humans as harmless farmers. They had no idea that those farmers were supported by the most advanced industrial infrastructure ever created. Hidden shipyards in asteroid belts and remote star systems could produce warships faster than any alien civilization thought possible. Automated factories on airless moons manufactured everything from simple tools to planet-cracking weapons, all controlled by artificial intelligences that could coordinate production across thousands of worlds simultaneously. Admiral Park Seonghwa, the Federation's top military commander, activated the strategic display. Red dots appeared throughout the galaxy, each one representing a human settlement. There were so many dots that they formed a solid wall of red light stretching across the outer rim territories. 45,000 colonies, Admiral Park said, grimly. 300 billion human beings, and they just murdered our people for refusing to become slaves. The president studied the display in silence. Each of those red dots represented communities like New Haven, peaceful farming towns, research stations, mining colonies, trading hubs, families who had left the crowded worlds of the inner galaxy to build new lives among the stars, parents who read bedtime stories to their children, teachers like Park Minji who dedicated their lives to educating the next generation. All of them now lived under the shadow of the Valani Empire. Secretary of State Kim Yuna leaned forward. Sir, we need to consider the diplomatic implications. If we respond militarily, other galactic powers might see us as the aggressors. They don't understand what really happened here. President Choi turned to face the council, and everyone in the room could see that something fundamental had changed in his expression. The careful diplomat who had spent years building peaceful relationships with alien civilizations was gone. In his place stood something much older and more dangerous. They broadcast the murder of our people as entertainment, he said quietly. They turned the deaths of children into propaganda. They want the galaxy to know what happens when you refuse to kneel to the Valani Empire. The president walked to Wei, the main display, where images of New Haven's destruction continued playing on loop. Burned schools, vaporized hospitals, families who would never come home. Then let's show the galaxy what happens when you murder human children. The transformation began within hours. Every human world received the same quantum-encrypted message. New Haven had been destroyed. Total war was declared. All resources were to be diverted to military production immediately. On Mars, the massive industrial complexes that manufactured civilian starships suddenly switched to military designs. Factory workers who had been building cargo haulers and passenger vessels found themselves assembling the frames of destroyers and battleships instead. The change happened so quickly that alien trade representatives didn't even notice until it was too late. In the asteroid mining stations of the belt, automated systems began extracting rare metals needed for military-grade armor plating and weapons systems. Robotic miners that had been collecting materials for construction projects started focusing on elements required for ship-mounted plasma cannons and defensive shields. The outer colonies, those peaceful farming worlds that the aliens thought were so harmless, revealed their true nature. Underground factories that had been producing agricultural equipment switched to manufacturing military hardware. Colonists who seemed like simple farmers turned out to be former military engineers, retired naval officers, and defense contractors, who had moved to the frontier for a quieter life. But most importantly, humanity's hidden shipyards came online. For decades, automated construction facilities had been building civilian vessels in remote star systems where no alien spy satellites could observe them. These yards were designed to look like mining operations or research stations from the outside. In reality, they were the most advanced naval construction facilities in the galaxy, capable of producing massive warships using entirely automated systems. Defense Minister Li stood in the Situation Room, watching status reports flood in from across human space. Production quotas that should have taken months to meet were being exceeded in days. Shipyards that the aliens didn't even know existed were launching completed warships every few hours. How long until we have a significant fleet ready? President, Choi asked. Li smiled grimly. Sir, we already do. The aliens think our navy consists of a few hundred patrol ships and system defense boats. They have no idea we've been building a real fleet for the past 50 years. How many ships are we talking about? Currently operational? 15,000 heavy warships, with another 50,000 in various stages of construction. But that's just the beginning. Our production capacity is about to increase by a factor of 10. The president nodded slowly. And how many ships can the Vellani Empire field? Intelligence estimates their total fleet strength at around 8,000 vessels, including support ships and patrol craft. Maybe 3,000 frontline warships. For the first time since receiving news of New Haven's destruction, President Choi allowed himself a cold smile. Then, we're going to outnumber them significantly. Yes, sir. Very significantly. The word went out through quantum communication networks to every human world, every colony, every settlement from the core worlds to the furthest frontier outposts. Humanity was going to war, and they were going to bring everything they had. The Vellani Empire had awakened something they couldn't possibly understand. For centuries, humans had spread across the galaxy like a quiet tide, building communities and raising families in peaceful obscurity. They had seemed harmless because they wanted to be harmless, but now one of their colonies had been destroyed. Their children had been murdered. Their people had been killed for refusing to become slaves. The peaceful farmers of humanity were about to remind the galaxy why their ancestors had once conquered an entire planet. The Vellani Empire celebrated their victory over New Haven for 3 full days. Their propaganda networks broadcast images of the destroyed human colony across their territory, showing their citizens how easily their military could crush any resistance. Admiral Zhou received commendations from the Vellani High Command and was promised a larger fleet to continue expanding their empire. They had no idea that their easy victory had just triggered the largest military mobilization in galactic history. While the aliens celebrated, something incredible was happening across human space. On worlds that the Vellani had dismissed as simple farming colonies, massive underground facilities were coming online. Production lines that had been quietly manufacturing civilian goods for decades suddenly switched to military hardware. The transformation was so complete and so rapid that it seemed almost magical. Admiral Kim Sun-ho stood in the command center of Shipyard Delta 7, a facility hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid in the outer rim. From the outside, it looked like a simple mining operation. Inside, it was one of the most advanced naval construction facilities ever built. Automated assembly lines stretched for kilometers through the asteroid's interior, where robotic workers could build an entire destroyer. In less than 48 hours, status report, Admiral Kim requested from his chief engineer. All production lines are now operating at maximum capacity, sir. We're completing 1 heavy cruiser every 6 hours, and the smaller shipyards are finishing destroyers and frigates even faster. The new automated systems are exceeding all our projections. Admiral Kim nodded grimly. He was a veteran of humanity's early colonial expansion, when human settlers had to fight off pirates and hostile alien raiders with whatever ships they could build. Back then, humanity had learned a crucial lesson. In space, you were only as safe as your ability to defend yourself. So while the galaxy saw humans as peaceful farmers, they had actually been preparing for war for over 50 years. Every agricultural world had hidden military production facilities. Every mining station could manufacture weapons and armor. Every research outpost was actually developing new military technologies. The aliens had completely misunderstood what humanity really was. On the frontier world of New Dakota, farmer-turned-factory supervisor Lee Gyong-soo watched as his agricultural processing plant completed its transformation. Just 48 hours earlier, these machines had been packaging grain for shipment to other colonies. Now they were manufacturing ammunition for ship-mounted plasma cannons. How are the workers adapting to the change? Asked Colonel Park Ji-won, the military liaison assigned to coordinate the planet's war production. Better than expected, Lee replied. Most of these folks have military backgrounds anyway. We came out here for the peace and quiet. But we never forgot our training. My machine operators used to build fighter jets before they became farmers. My logistics coordinator was a naval supply officer for 20 years. This was the pattern across human space. The simple colonists that aliens had dismissed were actually retired military personnel, former defense contractors, and experienced engineers who had moved to frontier worlds seeking quieter lives. When the call came to defend their civilization, they didn't need training. They just needed equipment. The evacuation of civilian populations began immediately. Transport ships that normally carried cargo between colonies were converted to passenger service, moving families from vulnerable frontier worlds to safer locations deeper in human territory. But these weren't panicked refugee flights. They were organized, methodical relocations carried out with military precision. 8-year-old Kim Somi didn't understand why her family had to leave their farm on New Montana. "Will we ever come back, Mama?" she asked as their transport ship lifted off from the colony's spaceport. Her mother, former Navy pilot Captain Yoon Ji-hye, knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, we'll come back when it's safe. Right now, the grown-ups need to make sure the bad people who hurt New Haven can never hurt anyone else again." As their ship reached orbit, Sami pressed her face to the window and gasped. The surface of New Montana was covered with lights she had never seen before. Massive underground facilities were opening their doors, revealing production lines that stretched to the horizon. Her quiet farming world was transforming into something that looked like a science fiction movie. "Mama, what are those, Captain?" Yoon smiled grimly. "Those are the factories that are going to build the ships to protect us, baby. Your planet isn't just a farm. It's one of humanity's most important military production centers. The recruitment drives began simultaneously across all human worlds. But these weren't desperate attempts to find enough volunteers. They were carefully organized efforts to handle the overwhelming response from citizens who wanted to serve their species in its time of need. On Earth, Recruitment Officer Staff Sergeant Cho Hyun-min had expected maybe a few hundred volunteers on the first day. Instead, he found a line stretching for 3 kilometers outside the recruitment center. Former military personnel who had been retired for decades were volunteering to return to service. College students were putting their education on hold to join the fleet. Entire families were volunteering together. "Sir, we have a problem," his assistant reported. "We have over 10,000 volunteers just at this center alone, and similar numbers at every other recruitment station on the planet. We don't have facilities to process this many people." Sergeant Cho shook his head in amazement. "That's not a problem, son. That's exactly what we were hoping for. Get on the comm to fleet headquarters. Tell them we're going to need a lot more ships, because we're going to have a lot more crews than we expected." The technical development programs were equally impressive. Engineer Song Aryam led a team of researchers at the classified Prometheus Research Station, where humanity's brightest minds worked on advanced military technologies. For years, they had been studying captured alien weapons and developing countermeasures, just in case humanity ever needed them. Now they needed them desperately. "The Vellani use plasma-based energy weapons," Song explained to her team during their emergency briefing. "Their ships have strong energy shields, but relatively weak physical armor. Our kinetic weapons should be highly effective against them, but we need to get through their shields first." Her team had been working on this exact problem for 3 years. They had developed new types of electromagnetic pulse weapons that could overload alien shield generators, leaving enemy ships vulnerable to conventional attacks. They had also created improved armor plating that could deflect plasma beams, and new sensor systems that could track cloaked ships. "How long until we can have these new weapons in mass production?" asked Admiral Kim during his weekly technology briefing. "The EMP pulse cannons are ready now, sir. We can start installing them on new ships immediately. The improved armor will take another month to fully implement, but we can begin upgrading existing vessels with temporary reinforcements." Meanwhile, intelligence operative Park Min-ho was coordinating the largest spy network in galactic history. Human traders, diplomats, and researchers throughout alien space were suddenly activated as intelligence assets, providing detailed information about Valani military positions, fleet movements, and industrial capacity. "What do we know about their total military strength?" asked Defense Minister Lee during a classified briefing. Park consulted his datapad. "The Valani Empire has approximately 8,000 military vessels of all types. 3,000 are frontline warships. The rest are support vessels, transports, and patrol craft. They have major naval bases at 7-star systems, with their primary fleet headquarters at Valani Prime. Industrial capacity? Much lower than ours, sir. They rely heavily on slave labor and conquered populations for manufacturing. Their production is centralized at a few major worlds, which makes them vulnerable to targeted strikes. If we can hit their shipyards, they won't be able to replace their losses." The numbers were staggering. In just 8 months, humanity had transformed from a peaceful confederation of farming colonies into the most powerful military force in their region of the galaxy. Hidden shipyards that no alien spy had ever detected were producing warships at impossible rates. The human fleet grew from 15,000 vessels to over 200,000, with more ships launching every day. But it wasn't just about quantity. The humans were building ships specifically designed to fight the Valani Empire. Every weapon system, every defensive measure, every tactical doctrine was created with one goal in mind: destroying the aliens who had murdered the children of New Haven. By year's end, Admiral Kim stood on the bridge of the brand-new dreadnought, New Haven's Vengeance, looking out at the largest fleet assembly in galactic history. Hundreds of thousands of human warships filled the space around the rally point, their running lights creating a constellation of deadly stars. Each ship carried the same message painted on its hull: "Remember New Haven." The Valani Empire still had no idea what was coming for them. Their intelligence services reported some unusual activity in human space, but they dismissed it as probably some kind of industrial expansion or trade disagreement. The idea that the peaceful farming communities could have built a fleet large enough to challenge their empire was simply unthinkable. They were about to learn that there were a lot of things about humanity they had failed to understand. And they were going to learn those lessons the hard way. The war machine was ready, the fleet was assembled, the weapons were loaded. Now it was time to make the Valani Empire pay for what they had done to New Haven. The first sign that something was wrong came from a routine Valani patrol ship near the edge of human space. Commander Veltanos had been assigned to monitor the border regions, keeping watch for any unusual activity from the species they had just taught a lesson on New Haven. It was supposed to be an easy assignment, watching over primitive farmers who posed no threat to anyone, but his sensors were showing readings that made no sense. "Run the scan again," he ordered his communications officer. "These numbers can't be correct." The young Valani officer's 4 hands moved quickly across the control panel, recalibrating the long-range sensors and running a second sweep of the nearest human system. The results came back exactly the same as before, and his grey skin turned even paler as he read the display. "Sir, I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system. It looks like there are hundreds of ships where our intelligence reports said there should only be a few dozen patrol vessels." Commander Veltanos studied the sensor data with growing unease. The supposedly quiet agricultural system of New Harvest was showing fleet formations that belonged on a major military world, not a farming colony. Worse yet, the ships were moving in organized patterns that suggested advanced tactical coordination. "Get me a direct line to fleet headquarters," he ordered. "Priority Alpha transmission." When the message reached Valani High Command 3 hours later, Intelligence Director Kazmoran initially dismissed it as a sensor malfunction, or rookie mistake. The humans were peaceful farmers who grew food and raised livestock. The idea that they could have hundreds of warships in a single system was ridiculous. But then similar reports started arriving from other border patrols. Scout ship Talon reported massive defensive installations around the human world of prosperity, where previous intelligence had shown only agricultural processing plants. The defensive platforms were larger than anything in the Vallani arsenal, bristling with weapons that sensor analysis couldn't identify. Reconnaissance vessel Knight's Edge transmitted images of what appeared to be a major shipyard in the supposedly empty Kepler 442 system. The facility was enormous, clearly capable of producing capital ships, and it was surrounded by completed vessels waiting in organized formations. Long-range sensor posts detected energy signatures consistent with major fleet movements throughout human space. Not the scattered patrol ships that intelligence reports had predicted, but organized battle groups moving with military precision. Within 48 hours, Intelligence Director Kazmoran was standing before the Vallani High Council with reports that none of them wanted to believe. "The humans appear to have been concealing their true military capabilities," he announced to the assembled leadership. "Our scouts are detecting fleet formations numbering in the thousands of ships. Supreme Commander Zarthul, the most powerful military leader in the Vallani Empire, laughed dismissively. "Thousands? You're talking about farmers and merchants. They don't have thousands of anything except grain shipments. Sir, I have visual confirmation from multiple sources. The humans have been building warships on a scale that rivals our own capabilities." The laughing stopped. "Supreme Commander." Zarthul leaned forward in his ceremonial armor, his four eyes focusing intently on the intelligence director. "Show me." The holographic displays filled the council chamber with images that defied everything the Vallani thought they knew about humanity. Massive shipyards hidden inside asteroids, defensive platforms that dwarfed Vallani battle stations, fleet formations, stretching across entire star systems. But the most shocking revelation came from Commander Yu Jihun, a human intelligence operative who had been feeding information to Vallani spies for months. The Vallani had thought he was a simple merchant, willing to sell secrets for money. They had no idea he was actually a deep-cover agent, whose job was to feed them false information about human capabilities. The intelligence reports that Yu had been providing painted humans as a weak, divided species with minimal military technology and no central coordination. According to his carefully crafted lies, human worlds barely maintained local defense forces and had no capacity for large-scale military production. The truth was exactly the opposite. So according to our most recent intelligence assessment, Director Kazmoran continued, his voice growing more strained with each word, the humans may have as many as 200,000 active warships, with production facilities capable of building more at unprecedented rates. The council chamber fell silent. 200,000 ships was more than the combined fleets of the three major galactic powers. It was impossible. No species could build that many vessels without someone noticing. "You're telling me," Supreme Commander Zarthul said slowly, "that the species we just attacked for refusing to provide slaves has a fleet 10 times larger than ours?" "Sir, that appears to be the case." Panic began to spread through Vallani High Command like a disease. Emergency meetings were called. Fleet commanders were summoned from across the Empire. Defensive positions were reinforced around major worlds. But every hour brought new intelligence reports that made the situation seem more hopeless. The humans weren't just building ships. They were building the right kinds of ships. Long-range sensor analysis revealed vessel designs specifically optimized for attacking Vallani technology. The humans had studied their enemies and created weapons designed to exploit every weakness in Vallani defensive systems. Desperate to avoid a war they suddenly realized they couldn't win, the Vallani High Council authorized immediate diplomatic contact with human leadership. They would offer reparations for New Haven. They would provide compensation for the lives lost. They would even withdraw from human space entirely if necessary. Anything to avoid facing a fleet of 200,000 warships. The message was transmitted on all diplomatic frequencies, requesting immediate negotiations with human leadership. The Vallani were prepared to discuss any terms, to make any concessions necessary, to prevent what was beginning to look like their own extinction. The response came 12 hours later, broadcast on every communication channel in Valani space. Captain Lee Seojin, speaking from the bridge of the human dreadnought New Haven's Vengeance, delivered a message that chilled every alien who heard it. To the Valani Empire. His voice was calm and professional, like someone discussing shipping schedules rather than declaring war. You murdered 60,000 innocent people. You turned children into ash for refusing to become slaves. You broadcast their deaths as entertainment. The captain paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of an entire species' rage. We are not interested in your negotiations. We are not interested in your reparations. We are not interested in your surrender. Remember, New Haven. The transmission ended, and across Valani space, long-range sensors began detecting something that had never been seen before in galactic history. A fleet so massive that it defied comprehension was moving through human space, heading directly toward Valani territory. 750,000 warships. The number was so large that Valani sensor operators initially thought it was a computer error. No species in galactic history had ever assembled a fleet even a tenth that size, but confirmation came from multiple sources: independent monitoring stations, neutral shipping vessels. Even automated warning beacons left behind by ancient civilizations confirmed what the sensors were detecting. Humanity was bringing everything they had. The largest military formation in recorded galactic history was advancing toward Valani space with one purpose: total annihilation of the empire that had dared to murder human children. Each ship in the massive armada carried the same message painted on its hull. Remember New Haven. Fighter squadrons flew in formations that spelled out the names of the victims. Capital ships broadcast memorial services for the dead colonists. The entire human fleet had become a moving monument to the people who had died rather than surrender their freedom. Supreme Commander Zarthul stood in his command center, staring at tactical displays that showed the approaching human armada. His military advisors were suggesting desperate strategies, attacking before the humans could fully organize their forces, seeking alliance with other alien species, even evacuating Valani space entirely. But the Supreme Commander knew the truth, that none of his advisors wanted to admit. They had awakened something that couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or defeated in conventional warfare. They had attacked a species that looked peaceful on the surface, but possessed the industrial capacity and military technology to destroy entire civilizations. The humans weren't coming to conquer Valani space. They were coming to erase the Valani Empire from existence, and there was absolutely nothing the aliens could do to stop them. The revelation was complete. The Valani finally understood what humanity really was. Not peaceful farmers, but the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, who had been quietly building the tools of war while maintaining the appearance of harmless agricultural communities. Now those tools were coming for them, and the reckoning would be absolute. The war began at exactly 0600 hours, Terran Standard Time, when the first wave of human ships crossed into Valani space. Admiral Kim Sunho watched from the bridge of his flagship as 750,000 warships spread across the border like a steel tide. The sight was so overwhelming that even veteran officers struggled to comprehend the scale of what they were witnessing. All fleet commanders report ready for combat operations, announced Communications Officer Lieutenant Yoon Deho. Admiral Kim nodded grimly. Signal all ships. Operation New Haven is now active. Rules of engagement are simple. No Valani military vessel is to be left operational. No Valani military installation is to be left standing. They wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson about challenging their empire. Today we teach them what happens when you murder human children. The first Valani border patrol encountered the human advance near the Zerion system. Commander Veltanos, the same officer who had first detected unusual activity in human space, found himself facing a fleet formation that stretched beyond his sensor's maximum range. His single patrol cruiser was confronted by over 3,000 human warships, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything in the Valani arsenal. This is Commander Veltanos of the Valani Imperial Navy, he transmitted on all frequencies. We surrender unconditionally. Please respond. The human response came from Captain Park Jae-sung aboard the destroyer Children's Tears. His voice was calm and matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. "Commander Veltanos, this is Captain Park. We received your surrender request. Unfortunately, the Valani Empire forfeited the right to surrender when you broadcast the murder of our people as entertainment. Remember New Haven. The patrol cruiser was destroyed 30 seconds later by concentrated plasma fire from a dozen human ships. There were no survivors. This scene repeated itself hundreds of times across the border as human forces methodically eliminated every Valani military presence they encountered. The aliens quickly realized that this wasn't a conventional war with negotiations and prisoner exchanges. This was an extermination campaign. The Valani High Command tried to organize a defense at the fortress world of Kethmore, where their largest fleet base protected the approaches to their core systems. Supreme Commander Zarthul assembled every available warship, creating a defensive formation of nearly 4,000 vessels, backed by massive orbital defense platforms. It was the strongest military position in Valani space, designed to stop any conceivable attack. Against a conventional enemy, it would have been absolutely impregnable. But the humans didn't attack conventionally. Admiral Kim arrived at Kethmore with over 200,000 ships. The Valani defensive fleet found itself outnumbered 50-1 by an enemy that had specifically designed their weapons to counter Valani technology. The battle lasted exactly 47 minutes. Human EMP pulse weapons disabled the orbital defense platforms in the opening minutes of the engagement. Kinetic bombardment systems shattered the Valani fleet formations, with projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. When Supreme Commander Zarthul's flagship was destroyed by a concentrated barrage from 30 human dreadnoughts, organized Valani resistance collapsed entirely. But the humans weren't finished. They had come to Kethmore not just to defeat the Valani fleet, but to eliminate the entire military infrastructure that had supported the Empire's expansion. Planet-cracking weapons, originally designed for mining operations, were deployed against the fortress world's surface installations. Within hours, Kethmore's military bases, shipyards, and weapons factories had been reduced to molten craters. The planet that had served as the Valani Empire's primary military stronghold was left uninhabitable, its surface scarred by weapons that turned solid rock into plasma. News of Kethmore's destruction spread panic throughout Valani space. If their strongest fortress world could be eliminated so easily, nowhere in the Empire was safe. Military commanders abandoned their posts. Civilian populations fled toward the Galactic Rim. Government officials began destroying classified documents and preparing evacuation plans. The Valani Parliament made one final attempt to end the war through diplomacy. They contacted every major galactic power, begging for intervention on their behalf. They offered to pay massive reparations to humanity. They proposed giving up half their territory as compensation for New Haven. The response came from President Choi Hyun-woo himself, broadcast on all diplomatic channels. The Valani Empire asked for this war when they chose to murder peaceful colonists. They wanted to demonstrate their strength by broadcasting the deaths of children. Now they will serve as a demonstration of what happens when you attack humanity. There will be no negotiations. There will be no mercy. There will be no survivors of their military or government. Remember New Haven. The siege of Valani Prime began 6 months after the war started. The capital world was defended by every remaining ship in the Empire, supported by the most advanced defensive systems Valani technology could create. Energy shields covered the entire planet. Automated defense satellites filled orbital space, with overlapping fields of fire. Admiral Kim arrived with over 300,000 human warships and proceeded to demonstrate why numbers matter in space warfare. The human fleet surrounded Valani Prime completely, creating a sphere of steel that nothing could escape. They didn't attempt to break through the planetary defenses. Instead, they methodically destroyed everything that tried to leave the planet, while building massive siege weapons in nearby space. Colonel Park Min-ji commanded the human ground forces that would eventually assault the planet. The former schoolteacher from New Haven had survived the bombardment that killed her students, and she had spent the past 18 months training for this moment. Her invasion force consisted entirely of survivors from destroyed human colonies and volunteers whose families had been killed by alien attacks over the years. "Remember why we're here," she told her troops as they prepared for the final assault. "Not for conquest, not for territory, for justice, for every child who died because they refused to become slaves, for every family that was murdered to send a message. Today we send our own message." The planetary invasion began after the orbital defenses were finally overwhelmed by sheer weight of firepower. Human marines landed at thousands of sites simultaneously, advancing with equipment and tactics specifically designed for urban warfare against Valani defenders. But organized resistance collapsed within days, as it became clear that the aliens were facing an enemy that outnumbered them by enormous margins. The final battle took place at the Valani Imperial Palace, where the last remnants of the alien government had barricaded themselves behind energy barriers and automated defense systems. Colonel Park led the assault personally, carrying a rifle that had belonged to one of her students, who died on New Haven. Emperor Zul'Karan, supreme ruler of the Valani. The Empire made one last attempt to negotiate as human soldiers breached the palace walls. "Please," he begged through a communication device, "we can discuss terms, we can make reparations, we can—" Colonel Park's response was simple and final. "You had your chance to discuss terms before you murdered my students. Remember New Haven. The Valani Empire officially ceased to exist when the Imperial Palace was captured and its government eliminated. But the war continued for another year as human forces methodically hunted down every remaining military installation, weapons facility, and government outpost throughout former Valani space. Other galactic powers watched in stunned silence as humanity demonstrated capabilities that none of them had suspected. The species they had dismissed as harmless farmers systematically dismantled an empire that had terrorized entire sectors for centuries. The Confederacy of Malix sent urgent diplomatic messages to Earth, offering immediate alliance and mutual defense agreements. The hegemony of Thrace proposed massive trade concessions and promised to respect all human territorial claims. Even the powerful Centauri Federation quietly withdrew their military forces from regions near human space. Within 2 years, the transformation was complete. Valani space had become human territory, populated by new colonies and defended by permanent fleet bases. The former empire's industrial facilities were converted to peaceful purposes or dismantled entirely. Survivors of the Valani species were relocated to reservation worlds where they could live under human supervision. But the most important change was how the galaxy viewed humanity. The quiet farmers who had seemed so harmless were revealed to be the most dangerous military force in known space. Human diplomats found that alien governments were suddenly very eager to negotiate favorable agreements and avoid any actions that might be seen as hostile. The message was clear to every species in the galaxy. Humanity didn't start wars, but when someone forced them to fight, they brought everything they had and they didn't stop until their enemies no longer existed. The New Haven Memorial was built on the former site of Valani Prime, featuring the names of every human who had died in alien attacks. At its center stood a simple inscription that served as both a promise and a warning. "They touched one of ours. We ended them all." The galaxy remembered New Haven. More importantly, they remembered what happened to those who forgot that behind every human smile lay the capacity for absolute warfare.